24 October 1946. Munich. A German civilian at his kitchen table writes, "We were safer as victims, more useful as followers, and most dangerous as accomplices who learned not to remember." He writes it in pencil between ration numbers he has to tally for the morning. He writes it on a page he can tear out and burn. He writes it like a diagnosis and a confession. It could not be spoken openly, not to an American officer, not to a neighbor, not even to the wife who knocks the dust from her shoes and says, "It is time for bed." It is a line with the power to brand him disloyal to the new order and disloyal to the old. It is the thesis of the years he will live after the war, and the years will prove him right. His name is Karl. He is 35. He survived the bombing of Munich by being in the cellar, then on the roofs, then in the cellar again. He wears the same grey jacket he wore in 1944, patched at the elbows. He works at the municipal housing office now, the Wohnenamt, because the old clerks are gone and because the new democracy needs hands to shuffle papers, calculate rooms, allocate lives. In his pocket is a letter from Vienna, sent by his wife's sister, an Austrian housewife named Margaretha. "We were the first victims," she writes, echoing the new official Austrian script of 1945, echoing the Moscow Declaration of 1943, echoing the speeches and the schoolbooks rolling off presses with missing pages. "Now we are hungry too," she adds. And then there is a camp near the edge of the city. They say it is for the displaced. Some of them curse us in Yiddish. "It is terrible what the Germans did, Karl, but we are not Germans." He underlines the last sentence twice, then stops. He thinks of Munich. He thinks of Vienna. He thinks of how nations tell themselves bedtime stories so they can sleep. 12 May 1945. Munich. The Americans arrived 2 weeks before. The white flags have not all been taken in. Street corners sag under the weight of debris. A woman in a scarf balances a brick on a brick on a brick on a brick and hands it down a line of women. A boy in a man's coat pulls a cart with a baby in it. Somewhere, a bicycle bell rings with an absurd normality that makes a returning soldier stop and cry behind a ruined wall. The city is a landscape of organized rubble. The Trümmerfrauen work with shovels and hands. They form teams, each woman given a ration bonus for hours logged. They wear gloves if they can find them. They wrap their palms with cloth if they cannot. They stack clean bricks. They sweep away soot. They print careful numbers on ruinous facades, an arithmetic of destruction the city can understand. House 14, no roof. 3 habitable rooms, 1 family. 2 children, missing husband, missing, missing, missing. The occupation forces move through the streets with maps and voices that say, "Curfew is 7, no fraternization, bring your weapons." The Americans are young. They are tired. They are polite when they can be. They are rough when anger or fear or orders make them so. They requisition the Krauses' flat for a captain. They take the piano and then say they will bring it back. They hang signs at crossroads showing a new geography, to the DP camp, this way, to the ration office, that way, to the denazification office, that way again. The mathematics of control is routine. Control the hours. Control the streets. Control the calories. Control the words. 14 May 1945. Vienna. Soviet officers in leather coats take over the police presidium. British convoys roll in from the west, and American jeeps move across the Ringstrasse while French liaison teams argue permissions at the edges. The flags of victory and division appear on buildings that lost their roofs long before. Margaretha stands in line for potatoes and writes later, "I am tired of history happening to us. They say we were the first victims. I think of the flag on our town hall in 1938 and the way the people cheered and the men in their brown shirts who were already there. And then I repeat the slogan to myself because it is safer. An Allied intelligence summary for the Munich military district, June 1945, notes that the population is docile, exhausted, and eager to resume normal life. It notes that attitudes vary widely regarding knowledge of the concentration camps, and that while outrage, disbelief, and denial are common, it is probably that many had at least an inkling. The summary is precise. It is clinical. It is based on informants, interviews, and the mathematics of a city that counted everything it could count, because everything it could not count had turned into smoke. Karl sits in a theatre with his co-workers and watches The Death Mills. The film is compulsory and very long. The credits say it was prepared by the US Army for German audiences. The images do the work. The narrator's voice does not have to do. He sees naked corpses in piles. He sees a bulldozer push them into a trench. He sees faces without expressions and faces stuck in a single permanent scream. He writes in his notebook, "I will never eat again." The next morning he eats thin soup and dry bread and goes to work. June 1945. The hunger is a fact. The hunger has numbers. The bread ration in Munich is 250 grams per day. The meat ration is 205 grams twice a week. The official calorie allotment bottoms at 1,000 per day for many adults, less in some places, more in none. Kohl-Ruben winter, people say later, but the Swedes are not yet the name of that winter. They are just turnips now, just another vegetable that can be boiled, mashed, and mixed with sawdust bread. The mathematics of calories is the arithmetic of survival. The black market begins with whispers, then stalls, then organized activity with runners, markers, and prices that make mockery of printed money. Cigarettes are the currency. American cigarettes are worth the most. British, less. German, hand-rolled, near worthless, unless you lump them together in handfuls. A pound of butter is 1,000 Reichsmarks or 10 packs of Lucky Strikes. A dress is 3 packs. A knight coiled around a stranger's arm can be 5 or can be 10. This is not moral arithmetic. It is caloric, sexual, practical arithmetic. It is arithmetic written on the rib cages of women and men and children who do not want to starve. "I traded my wedding silver for bacon," writes Margarethe to Karl. "I am the Austrian housewife who lived through first victim and now lives through co-perpetrator in whispers. I hear from Jewish survivors on the street. I do not know what to do with any of these words. I can only say, 'What have you got?' and hold 2 eggs like they are love letters." The new authorities demand questionnaires. The Fragebogen is long, 131 questions in some versions. Name, rank, party membership number, positions held, organizations joined, donations made. Did you read Der Stürmer? Did you march? Did you denounce? Did you profit? The paperwork pours into offices where tired men like Karl sit at tables made of doors stacked on bricks. They stamp, they staple, they stack. They pass the stacks to panel called Spruchkammern. The Spruchkammern must read each case and categorize the person into one of 5 Hauptschuldige, major offenders, belastete offenders, minder belastete, lesser offenders, Mitläufer, followers, entlastete, exonerated. This is the mathematics of guilt. It is bureaucratic. It has checkboxes. It tries to make a moral ledger out of years in which the ledger itself was corrupted. Karl fills out his own. He writes that he joined the party in 1937 to keep his job. He writes that he attended 2 meetings of the local cell and found them distasteful. He writes that he contributed to winter relief and bought a book of Hitler's speeches because a supervisor stood at the door and took note of who took one and who did not. He writes that he was never a member of the SS, SA, or SD. He writes that he did not profit from Jewish property. He writes that he did not know about the camps. He writes that he suspected something and did not want to know. He attaches a letter written by a priest who survived Dachau. The priest signs his name and adds, "This man brought food to our parish during the war when we were hungry." The letter is a Purcellschein, a Purcell certificate. It is named for a laundry soap. It is meant to wash the stains out. The Spuchkammer hears Karl's case on a grey morning in December. They sit behind a table. They take notes. They ask about his NSDAP number. They ask if he attended any training courses. He says no. They ask if he denounced anyone. He says no. They ask if he benefited from the Aryanization of a dairy on his street. He says no. He says, "I stayed out of it," and he is telling a kind of truth. They classify him as a Mitläufer and fine him 2 months' wages. They ban him from holding a senior office for 2 years. They smile, almost sorry, and tell him he can appeal. He does not. He goes back to the housing office the next day because the housing office cannot function without men like him, and the new order needs stability more than thorough justice. The mathematics of guilt yields a distribution that looks like normal life. Very few are major offenders. More are offenders. More are offenders. Many are lesser offenders. Most are followers. Some are exonerated. The numbers are not precisely even from place to place, but they are similar. They are not justice. They are not a lie. They are the settlement a broken state makes with itself under the eyes of foreign masters who are themselves learning what it means to govern a defeated people. An American occupation report from September 1946 notes, denazification has begun to stall due to the necessity of administrative continuity and the impracticality of eliminating all who participated. It is precise. It is unsurprised. The trains start arriving from the east as soon as the tracks can be repaired. They are packed with people whose names are German and whose homes are no longer. They come from Königsberg, now Kaliningrad. They come from Breslau, now Rochwau. They come from the Sudetenland, the mountains of Bohemia where a German-speaking world existed and then did not. They come with pushcarts, prams, bundles. They carry papers issued by camp administrators in Polish or Czech. They are called expellees, the Tribune. They arrive in towns that have no roofs and ask for rooms that do not exist. The arithmetic of rooms is savage. The housing office in Munich has a table of allowed square meters per person. It is a moving number. It shrinks when a coal train is late. It shrinks again when a bombed-out shopfront collapses and takes 5 people with it. It shrinks when a new train arrives at Dachauer Strasse station and a woman with 4 children shows papers signed by a major in the US Army that say to be given priority 1 housing. The woman cries. The clerk cries. Karl does not cry. He chews his pencil and assigns them to an apartment he knows is already full. He writes in the margin, "Investigation pending." He writes in his notebook at night, "What I do feels like triage of souls." The families he moves into rooms do not forgive him. The families he moves out do not forgive him. The expellees hate the locals who kept their apartments and their jobs. The locals hate the expellees who arrive with letters that order them to share. "They despise us," writes an expellee named Erika in a 1946 report sent from a collection point in Swabia. "They say we lost our homes because we were Hitler's advance guard in the East, but we lost everything. The women of this town call us names in the stairwell. They say we do not know how to keep the stair swept." In Karl's mind, this becomes a kind of equation. Square meters multiplied by resentment equals a permanent political party. He is right. He cannot know it yet, but those he settles into attics and basements will be a constituency for the new German conservative movement, as surely as the trade union men will be the constituency of the Social Democrats. That is the mathematics of housing. There is a displaced persons camp near Munich at Feldafing. There is another at Landsberg. There are more in Schwandorf, Kornwestheim, and at the edges of cities in barracks that used to house German soldiers and now house those the soldiers once guarded. Some of the DP camps are Jewish, some are Polish, some are a mix of Balts, Ukrainians, and people whose papers say stateless. The rows of huts are neat because their residents work very hard to make neatness out of injury. In the DP camp at Zeilsheim near Frankfurt, a newspaper appears. In Feldafing, a school is formed. A theatre troupe performs. People marry. People are born. People are born. People die. On Sundays, Germans walk past the fences and look. They do not stare. They do not pretend not to look. They glance. They catch the eyes of men whose eyes do not look away. There are words. Schwein, murder, Jude, Nazi. They do not fight. They do not reconcile. They live near one another with the knowledge that the banality of proximity is a punishment and a burden. Today I saw a woman in a striped jacket, writes a girl named Hannelore in her diary found later in a box at the Bundesarchiv. She touched the wire because it was not electrified anymore. She touched it like you touch a familiar scar. Mama said, "Do not stare." Papa said we did not know. I think of the movies they made us watch and the smell in the yard in 1943, and I do not know what to think. There is work. There is always work. The rubble must be cleared. The pipes must be repaired. The sewers must be unclogged. The electric must be reconnected. The huge job of rebuilding a country begins not with speeches and plans, but with men and women carrying beams and glass, with women washing coal dust at the ends of long days, with lines of children carrying chunks of bricks because their small hands can carry small loads all day. And that is the arithmetic of recovery. Karl gets promoted. This is not because he is particularly ambitious or admired. It is because he stays. He comes to work. He does not make mistakes they cannot afford. In 1947, he is moved from the housing office to the office that handles allocations for cement. The allocation of cement is a political act. It is the creation of a future. A new school built now is a signal. A new barracks built now is another. There are arguments. There are committees that investigate the committees. There are memos that contradict memos. In the end, the priority is obvious, roofs first. This means new prefabricated apartment blocks, quick and ugly, an architecture of necessity. An American report dated March 1947 notes, morale in the Munich governmental offices is low, absenteeism is high, bribery is endemic, though not rampant. It also notes, without these offices there would be chaos. Margaretha writes again. She writes of Vienna and of Austria's new federal government. She writes of the trials that take place there too. She writes that they are not Nuremberg, they are smaller. She writes that men she knew as party functionaries now sit and wait and are told they may go. We were the first victims, the newspapers say. We were annexed, the politicians say. We did not have a choice, the schoolbooks say. We had choices, she thinks, and then scrubs potatoes in a bucket and says nothing. Some of the POWs come back in 1947. They reappear from France quickly, from Britain more slowly, from the Soviet Union almost not at all. Men in ragged coats walk into kitchens and pick up toddlers who do not remember them. Some of those toddlers scream. Some of those men turn and put a hand to their face and go to the yard and stand and look up. They light a cigarette if they can find one. In the East, the returning is a flood that never comes. In the West, it is a stream that becomes a river and settles into a trickle by 1949. The last wave in 1955 is a gesture called freedom. The fight for them is political arithmetic. Adenauer makes it part of his bargain, and the country signs. June 20, 1948. Currency reform. The new money appears. The old money disappears. The black market collapses in a day. The shelves in shops fill as if conjured. Karl buys shoes for his wife. He taps the leather and smiles at the grain. He buys a piece of sausage and a bottle of beer that he drinks cold. The news says the Deutsche Mark is a new beginning and the ending of old accounts. The mathematics of post-war Germany changes. It is now an equation with variables called productivity, exports, Marshall Plan shipments, and price controls. It is less personal. It is colder. It is better. The Marshall Plan arrives as crates and paperwork. The crates contain flour and powdered milk. They also contain machines. The paperwork contains conditionalities. The administrative state in Munich becomes an administrative layer in a network of states called the Bizone, then the Trizone, then the Bundesrepublik. Even the name, Federal Republic, sounds like a password. It promises what it does not fully have, a republic and a federation. 1948 is also the airlift. Berlin is a chessboard, and planes are pawns and bishops that refuse to break the rules. The tonnage reported in radio broadcasts becomes a kind of calendar. 1,200 tons today. 3,000, 5,000, 8,000. 8,000, 8,000. The news is numbers about coal and flour. It is also numbers about births and deaths. Neither is separate from the other. The Cold War turns the city. The Eastern Zone becomes a project that sells itself as justice. Neither project is exactly what it claims. Both are exactly what they must be, given their mathematics. Karl goes to work and counts cement bags. He has a new boss. The boss is younger and smiles more. He talks about productivity and not about guilt. He hands out leaflets about the new social market economy. He puts a small portrait of Ludwig Erhard on the wall, where once there was a bare space and before that another portrait. There is a rhythm to these substitutions that makes Karl's stomach clench. School begins again in 1949 for Karl's eldest son. The schoolbook says there was a chancellor named Brüning and a depression, and then a man named Hitler who promised jobs and war. It says there were bombings and expulsions and hunger. It says Germany suffered. It says Germany suffered. It says Germany is a democracy again. It says never again in small letters. In the playground, boys play soldiers and thieves. They shout, hands up, and then argue whether that is allowed anymore. They change the game to cowboys. The teachers encourage it. They prefer Americans and their myth to anything German and military. It is safer. The arithmetic of memory is subtle in the schoolyard. It adds and subtracts the same events and comes to a total that comforts the adults standing by the gate. 1950. Marshall Plan shipments peak and then taper. Factories rebuild. BMW makes motorcycles that look elegant and thin. Maffei returns to making locomotives. Siemens resurrects itself. Small firms that never had second acts discover they have one. The Wirtschaftswunder is not a miracle. It is the accumulation of labor, capital, and political decisions. It is the presence of a war that lifted competitors elsewhere out of the market and left German engineers standing in a field of possibilities. It is the absence of reparations on a scale that would have destroyed the currency. It is the presence of Americans whose strategic fear of the Soviet Union made them generous. The municipal office where Karl works begins to feel like a normal place. The jokes are normal. The petty rivalries are normal. The promotions are normal. The one thing that is normal, the one thing that is not normal is the way conversations stop when someone asks an old question. Where were you in 1942? What did you do in 1938 when the synagogue burned? Did you say anything? Karl is the kind of man who says, that is not for the office. He is also the kind of man who writes at night, Our new democracy rests on words we do not say aloud. It rests on a bargain we will build and we will forget. The denazification offices close, slowly and then all at once. The files are boxed and sent to the Bundesarchiv. The boxes sit on shelves where future historians will read the pages. They will see how ordinary people re-describe their pasts. They will see how many checked followed orders. They will see how the phrases repeat. They will see how some lies are identical because they are the lies the world taught people to tell. There are memorials for bombings. There are processions for the expellees with banners that name old towns that are now off the map. There are festivals that commemorate flight and loss and a homeland imagined and gone. There are very few memorials for the victims of German actions in 1952 and 1953. Those that exist are small, accidental, located in courtyards and churchyards and places where a few held on to memory like a woman in a striped jacket holding the wire, touching a familiar scar. The German courts try men who commanded in the East. They try men who shot in the West. They try men who signed orders and men who carried them out. The numbers are small. The sentences are often light. Some are harsh. A few are life. The mathematics of justice is constrained by evidence and appetite. The appetite for punishment wanes as people want to be done. The evidence sits in boxes that are heavy and unread. In Austria, the myth of the first victim becomes a currency. It is banked by politicians. It is spent by people like Margaretha at the counter of everyday life. We did not choose it, she says in the 1950s, when her son asks about 1938. He was born in 1940 and remembers nothing. Your father was in Poland and then in Russia and then in a hospital in Graz. We lost plenty too. The boy nods. He reads textbooks that say much the same. The State Treaty of 1955 returns a sovereign Austria to the map. Neutrality is declared a national character trait. The line between German and Austrian memory grows deeper. 1961. The Eichmann Trial. It is broadcast on the radio and on television. It is not about Germany officially. It is about Israel trying a man who orchestrated the machinery of murder. It is about survivors speaking. It is about the pictures again. But this time the pictures have witnesses attached who say, I was there. He was there. He did this. The mathematics of denial stumbles on 20-hour testimonies recorded with steady cameras and translated into living rooms where men and women in Munich and Vienna sit and drink beer and say nothing. 1963-1965. The Frankfurt Auschwitz trials. German judges hear German witnesses speak about German crimes. The difference is structural, not emotional. It is a recognition that the legal system can look inward. It changes something in the air. Not everything. Something. Karl's youngest is 15. He asks questions. Karl says, I was a clerk. I kept the records. I went to church. I did not shoot anyone. His son says, but you did not protest. Karl says, we did not have the option. In the East, statues are erected for anti-fascists. In the West, plaques are put on walls for those who died in the air raids. The two Germanys erect monuments to two halves of a story. Neither half is complete. The arithmetic of interpretation, a professor at the university calls it in an article that circulates in the city offices, is unequal. The sums are performed to produce identities that serve politics. Every state writes history with a budget, he says in a lecture. It is accounting for the dead. Margaretha writes again in 1986. The letter is longer. Her handwriting is shakier. The letter arrives in a Frankfurt envelope because she now lives with her daughter in a flat above a bakery in Otterkring, and the post is faster this way. They talk about Waldheim, she writes. They talk about the war again. They say we were also guilty. They say we were also guilty. They say we were co-perpetrators. I say we knew, we were there, we cheered. We practiced being brave only when it cost nothing. I cooked. I stood in lines. I have small sins. I have small goodnesses. I do not know whose national history can hold that. She adds, my husband is dead. He never talked. I think he was afraid of his own words. Karl reads the letter in his quiet flat in Munich. He is 65. He has retired from the city office. The office sent him a cheap pen and a card. They said, for your service. He reads the news. He watches television stories about the Waldheim affair, about Austria's reckoning. He feels a surge of bitterness at the first victim myth he heard for decades, and a surge of relief that someone else is finally saying the words he wrote in pencil in 1946. He looks at the shelves that hold his old notebooks. They are an archive no one will read. They are a record of a man working at the nodes of allocation and memory. He picks one and opens to a page dated 12 January 1947. A woman begged for a room today, he wrote. I told her to come back with a letter. She said she had no paper. I could have given her a paper. I could have given her a paper. I did not. That is the size of my sin. That is also the size of my honesty. He remembers the black market at the Stackus where women sold themselves for cigarettes because they did not want to starve. He remembers the way men in uniform sometimes paid and sometimes took. He remembers an American captain who came to his office and demanded an apartment for a German woman with whom he had fallen in love. He remembers that he found the apartment. The two left the country. He never saw them again. He remembers the DP camp at Feldafing where he stood with a bag of shirts from the office and watched a boy carefully fold one and say, Danke, with a look that was complicated by the fact that the boy had been made to say, Heil, to survive. He remembers the smell of boiled potatoes that was everywhere in 1945 and 1946. He remembers the thinness of the winters and how coal dust fell on his hands. He remembers the first time he walked into a church after the war and heard a priest say, we must confess everything, and a murmur go through the pews like wind. He remembers two men in the back stand and walk out. He wonders if they were guilty. He wonders if they were simply tired. He thinks of the phrases of the time like beads on a string. Stunde Null. The 0 hour that was not zero. Denazification. Mittelalter. Pursueschein. Vertriebenen. Wirtschaftswunder. He thinks of the arithmetic he was asked to do. Square meters per person, calories per day, cement per street, shares per firm, votes per party, guilty by category, innocent by letter. He thinks of how the numbers allowed him to continue without talking about the things behind the numbers, and how that was the actual function of the numbers, and how that was the actual function of the numbers. He thinks of Margaretha's life in Vienna. He thinks of her washing floors in 1945 and pointing to the sky and saying, we are free, and then later pointing to the same sky and saying, we are neutral. He thinks of her making soup in 1950 and teaching her children to say the right things to the right men and not to say the wrong things, even to themselves. He thinks of her using the slogans of first victim to get through one set of years and the slogans of co-perpetrator to understand another, and how neither offered enough space for the cooking, washing, trading, and keeping their mouths closed that made up the reality of her days. 1989. The wall in Berlin falls. It is the festival of history that officials always promised and never delivered. It is loud and ugly and beautiful in equal measure. Men pound concrete with hammers. Women push baby carriages around piles of blocks. The numbers on television now are not tonnages but exchange rates and population flows. People cross. People shop. People stand and stare at each other like cousins meeting after a funeral. In Vienna, Margaretha stands in front of a television and says, "So." In Munich, Karl says nothing and then writes, "We are again offered a version of ourselves. We will take some of it. The rest we will put in the cupboard with the plates and the rags." He still sees men who once wore the wrong lapel pins at the city hall when he goes to pick up a certificate. They are old. They look like uncles. They are old. They look like uncles. They are polite. They are not ashamed because they have settled a lifetime's worth of accounts with themselves and decided they paid enough. He does not disagree. He does not agree. He signs for his document and goes home. He still hears of funerals for expellees who kept a key to a house in Glogau or Eger on a ribbon which they wore under a shirt. The key is heavy and now symbolic, and now a charm, and now a talisman. It is proof that loss can be made into a private heirloom when the public will not take it up. He still passes a plaque on a school that says, "Here stood the synagogue burned in 1938. The plaque is small. The school is large. Children play in the yard. They are loud. They are alive. This is the arithmetic the world prefers, the living outnumbering the dead. But memorials are the algebra of the past. They balance terms you cannot see." He opens the notebook and writes again with the same pencil he always buys at the same stationer, because habit is a church of its own. He writes a sentence he knows is dangerous and knows is a summation. He writes it with the precision of a clerk who spent years writing numbers into boxes and learning that some boxes hold more than numbers. We became a decent country by promising never to ask each other how we survived in decent years. He looks at it. He considers crossing it out. He does not. He writes instead, "This is not an indictment. It is a description." He adds, "This is my country as it exists between the stories it tells and the stories it cannot bear to tell." He thinks again of the seeing of the camps, the photo of a boy with a shaved head and eyes like holes, the smell and the silence, the argument with his father in 1946, when the old man said the films were made to humiliate them. The old man died. The argument lasted longer. Karl returns in memory to January 1947. A line of women outside the office. He held the list. He read out names in a voice that was too steady. He gave the last room to a woman who had a letter from a colonel. He did not give it to the woman who had lost 2 children to diphtheria that winter because she had no letter. He told himself he was following orders. He told himself this was building a state. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself he had many choices. They were all difficult. He writes, "The front line after 1945 ran through my memory and my paperwork. It ran along the edge of my desk and through the questions I ask myself each night. It did not run across a battlefield. It ran here." The story of civil life in Germany after the war is an inventory of the ordinary and the heavy. It is a list of items you can write down and items that write themselves into your sleep and wake with you when you are an old man tying his shoes. It is a trinity of numbers, calories, square meters, and categories of guilt. It is also a trinity of images. A woman handing a brick to another woman. A child touching a fence without electricity. A man at a desk writing a sentence he will not say aloud. First victim. Co-perpetrator. Never again. Slogans are ladders. People climb them. The rungs are close together when you are hungry. They are far apart when you have time to think. They sometimes lead to a better place. They sometimes lead back to the room where you started. Marguerite climbed both. Her hands were never clean. Neither were they entirely dirty. The Austrian housewife lived between myths, between the lines, between the sink and the street. She bought sugar when she could. She lit candles on All Souls' Day. She sent a package to Karl in 1947 with a bar of soap and a small cake. He took the cake to work and cut it into 8 pieces and gave it to the women who came to the office for rooms. They all said thank you, and one cried. He wrote that night, "We are greedy for kindness. We hoard it. We ration it. We organize it. We organize it. We organize it. We organize it. We use it to disguise our other deficits. We invent new words when the old ones stick in our throats." He remembers the late 1940s public screenings of Waldheim film. The Allied authorities made attendance mandatory. The films were narrated